Welcome back to the Papa Schro Knows podcast. It's been quite a little minute since we did a podcast, and I keep wanting to say Chiefs Kingdom, but we're keeping this one MMA related. I kind of planned to separate these episodes between basically what I was talking about, and just hadn't got around to anything MMA wise. But I feel like in the last few weeks we've had so much go down in the MMA world, and just a lot to get to, a lot to talk about. I've got about three major talking points for this podcast, and like I said, just a lot going on between Tyson Fury, Francis Ngannou, which really plays into the MMA world, to the UFC 294 card and shake-up and everything that happened with that, and just a huge fight between Volk and Islam Makhachev, as well as Chimaev and Usman stepping up to take on Chimaev. Big card there, and UFC 295 as well. Big shakeup in that card here in the last week or so. So a lot going on in the MMA world, really, these last few weeks, and really one of my major reasons that I just kind of wanted to talk some MMA and really kind of move the channel a little bit in that kind of direction. And speaking of channel, so YouTube channel Papa Schro, check that out. Got Chiefs, all kinds of Chiefs content, as well as trying to get some more MMA related content on there. So subscribe if you're into that. Check out some videos, a lot of film reviews for the Kansas City Chiefs and their 2023 season so far. Podcast available wherever you're going to find podcasts, depending on where you're listening right now, whether it's Spotify or Apple Podcast, as well as YouTube, and what else? papashowknows.substack.com. Check that out as well. My Substack, putting up weekly stuff. Usually got at least a pre and post game for the Chiefs games coming up. Tried to throw some MMA related content in there too, and you never know what you're gonna get from me. I feel sometimes I kind of try to widen my horizon and what I'm writing about and things. So with that, let's get straight into this podcast. So I wanted to start with UFC 294, just kind of go over everything that happened in that card, and really how crazy it was leading up to it. You had Islam Makhachev knock out Alexander Volkanovski. First of all, let me point out that I was 2-0 in my predictions. I predicted the co-main and main events, and I just would like to point out that I was 2-0 in those. I picked Khamzat Chimaev to win. He did decision win over Kamaru Usman, and we'll get into that in a second. But then the head kick knockout of Makhachev over Volk. Now listen, I did not expect that to go down the way it went down whatsoever. I definitely expected more of a fight from Volk, but such short notice, and the way he did that, I think he cut something crazy like 20 some odd pounds, and I think it was like 10 days notice, something like that. So definitely quite the job just to get there, really, for Volkanovski. I feel like he did such a great job just to give us the fight, and the fight that we all wanted to see. Of course, it was supposed to be Charlie Oliveira, who suffered a big-time cut right before the fight. Big gash on his, I think it was on his right eye, like right above his right eye. There was just no way that they were going to be able to get that done or, sealed up and healed by the time that card was going to roll around. And that one also was on Fight Island. So first time I think the UFC had been back to Fight Island in quite a while. A lot of big cards there through COVID, and one thing that really helped the UFC keep on going, and how the UFC pushed through COVID was really awesome to see, and crazy to see how many fans the UFC has just gained over the last few years between everything that happened with Conor McGregor and that whole era, and as well as the COVID era, and it really just being the only sport that was available, or still had live events and still had things going on. So I think I'm just gonna go ahead and use that to transition into this Fury and Ngannou. or we'll go back to Chimaev and Usman real quick before we jump into that. Just kind of talking about, the rise of MMA and, what Conor did for MMA and the Conor versus Floyd matchup. But shout out to Kamaru Usman. Kamaru Usman is a world champ through and through. To be able to step up and take this fight, his was right around the same time, about 10 days notice, something like that. And for Usman to step up, go up a weight class, coming off of back-to-back losses against Leon Edwards, just a fantastic job to get there and to make this fight happen. And hats off to both these guys, Alexander Volkanovski and Kamaru Usman. I mean, just cut from a different cloth at the end of the day. Both stepping up, short notice to fight guys that I don't think a lot of people want to fight. I don't think a lot of people want to fight Khamzat Chimaev, and I don't think a lot of people want to fight Islam Makhachev. So, plain and simple, just the fact that they stepped up and were able to fight and came with it, awesome to see. Paulo Costa was the other one that pulled out, obviously, against Chimaev. Costa's situation, I think it was a surgery. I can't remember exactly what it was. I think it might have been on his wrist, but I'm not 100% sure. Don't quote me on that one. Again, just want to say hats off to those guys because they really stepped up in a big way, saved that card, and, they're definitely, at the top of their class, the true world champions, So to kind of segue into this Tyson Fury Francis Ngannou fight or boxing match, Ngannou shocked the world, and I don't know if I 100% expected it, but at the end of the day, I mean, the power that Ngannou holds, and I knew that could still hold up and translate to boxing. Obviously, you've got a guy in Francis Ngannou or Tyson Fury that is the best of the best, the cream of the crop, world champ, and pretty much anyone he gets in there with, he's able to outmaneuver. His technique is second to none. And me being an MMA guy, I mean, I'm not hugely well versed in boxing. I will admit that and say that just to clear up anything that you're going to get out of me in this next segment of talking about this boxing matchup. Just because from what I've seen from Fury, the Deontay Wilder fights, but just seeing how he operates and how he moves, amazing. But at the same time, on the flip side, I always felt like Ngannou, from the moment this was announced, had a better chance than maybe a Conor McGregor, because Ngannou wanted to be a boxer. When he first came into combat sports, that is what he wanted to do. And it's well documented that he wanted to be a boxer. And so, I think just him carrying that with him throughout his MMA career and, wanting to be a boxer, I think, in the back of his head probably the whole time. The way he worked on his boxing, the way he boxed in the UFC. I mean, a guy like Alistair Overeem, the way he knocked him out. I mean, Alistair Overeem is a top flight striker in the world of mixed martial arts. I mean, that's a K1 level kickboxer right there. I mean, Overeem has competed over in kickboxing just as much. And you've got it's a lot different in boxing. And one thing about boxing, I guess here's where we take a turn. So, boxing fans, you can go ahead and tune out here, because at the end of the day, when it comes down to boxing, you are getting one very small sliver of what a fight is. And for me personally, I've always kind of retained this mentality, and especially, when you talk boxing versus fighting and all that, there's a reason you don't see boxers go over to have real fights. Boxers stay in boxing matches. Boxers don't come to fight. At the end of the day, you have a guy in Francis Ngannou who's used to a fight. A fight and a boxing match, two wildly different things. You have a very limited set of rules in boxing. It is a lot easier in a sense. There's so much less that you have to worry about. There's 1,001 ways to lose an MMA fight. and not to say there's not 1,000 ways to lose a boxing matchup, but at the end of the day, you have to look out for so many different things. Just, even the way you move your head and head movement. I mean, you move your head too far down in a fight, you're catching a knee. Somebody's going to time that. You're ducking in a boxing match. I mean, you can go as low as you want pretty much. I mean, you watch for the uppercut, but I mean, at the end of the day, you ain't got nobody throwing a knee up the middle trying to knock you out. And that's where, kickboxing is going to give you closer to what you're going to see in MMA. And, boxers have always held on to, the boxing sucks in MMA. The guys would never stand a chance in a boxing ring. And, that's been fairly true. And I think that Francis Ngannou, with his power kind of shining through in the Fury fight, it just goes to show, that power can kind of balance that out a little bit. But at the end of the day, I think what you see, I would love to see more boxers come over. And Deontay Wilder has mentioned that he wouldn't be against fighting Francis Ngannou in the PFL or something like that. And that's something I would love to see. And a guy like Ngannou, he's probably not going to go for the takedown, although we know he can. That's a real Gane fight. I mean, that was one thing going into the Gane versus Jones fight that I just thought, we just watched a guy pretty much get dominated by a guy with two blown out knees out wrestling him. So, I mean, what did we really think was going to happen with Jones and Gane? But shout out to Francis Ngannou. I think that he did, he carried that flag for MMA, and I think that everyone that's, entrenched in MMA and everything is definitely proud of what Francis Ngannou did, and, he quite possibly could have won that matchup. Obviously judging was what it was. I'm not exactly sure what the final scores were, but I did see, like, on Verdict MMA, granted an MMA app, the community voted Ngannou as the winner. So definitely a very close fight. Dana White was blown away in what he said. I'll find that clip, maybe throw it in right here.
I didn't see the fight, but the fact that he went 10 rounds with Tyson Fury is crazy. So if you look at, he just went 10 rounds with Tyson Fury. Conor made it 9 or 10 with Floyd. Anthony Pettis just beat Roy Jones Jr. I know Roy's freaking 60 years old or whatever, but I mean, I don't know what the hell is going on. It's crazy. I didn't see the fight, but the fact that he went 10 rounds is unbelievable.
What do you think? Did it hurt UFC? Do you care? Does it matter? What are your thoughts on it generally?
No, I don't care. Listen, these guys, at some point, everybody's going to move on, and everybody has to do what's right for them and make money for their families. So, whatever they got to do, they got to do.
Nonetheless, so what we saw from Ngannou was awesome to see. And a big dub for MMA. Big win, I think. So we'll see how the crossovers go, if they continue or anything like that. But honestly, I think Tyson Fury, especially after that matchup, probably has no, I don't want to say business, but no real want to get into a cage with Francis Ngannou, and I doubt that's going to happen. We'll see about Deontay Wilder, and we'll see what Ngannou wants to do. Ngannou may want to go forward and continue to box. I did see a video pop up. I didn't watch it, but from Chael Sonnen and rumors of him fighting in December possibly, or boxing in December. So we'll see. But definitely just a huge shout out, and it just goes to show at the end of the day, I mean, you can't compare a fighter to a boxer, I don't think. And, again, all the talk will always be, in MMA, their boxing's not good. But, I mean, we're talking about fighters. We're talking about a real fight versus a boxing matchup, Because if you got into a street fight with a boxer and an MMA fighter, I'm going to take an MMA fighter 10 out of 10 times. I mean, obviously, if we're talking about same skill set, same skill level in their respective, obviously not, we're not talking Tyson Fury versus a prelim guy in the UFC, but, if you're talking about same level, I mean, the fighter's going to win 10 out of 10 times. They're just, a boxer doesn't have a chance. They don't have the tools, in a real fight. It just is what it is, and that's a hill I'm willing to die on. So, with that, and kind of talking about John Jones, going to UFC 295, big shakeup on this card, which this card is going to be awesome, I think. Looking at the card right now, just looking at the main card, you got Yuri Prochazka coming back and trying to reclaim his throne as the 205 king. This is going to happen Saturday, November 11th, so next weekend. Taking on Alex Pereira. And, man, Pereira moving up to 205 is going to be fun to watch. I think 185 was, he made it, but seeing him at 205 is going to be a different kind of monster, I think. And to face Prochazka, I mean, obviously Yuri Prochazka, the last time we saw him fight was that insane Glover Teixeira fight. And that might be, that's right up there with, fights that I watched live, probably right up there with like Hendo and Shogun and, kind of a fight like that. Because, I mean, man, that fight was just insane. I went back and rewatched it maybe a month or two ago. Maybe it's been a couple months. Sometime over the summer, though, I went back and rewatched that fight on a flight, and just, man, what an insane fight. What a story, what a battle. Just, that entire, as a huge wrestling fan, to see a story like that told, almost like a wrestling-esque story in a wrestling match, be told in an MMA fight. I mean, just insane. Came down to the wire. Prochazka gets a sub at the end. I would have loved to see what the judges would have scored it, but at the same time, also getting that finality of the choke was awesome, and passing of the torch in a way. But this 205 division is absolutely in shambles, and so hopefully next Saturday we kind of get some, a little bit of structure back to this division, I guess, after, we've seen vacated title after vacated title. It seems like it's been just kind of crazy. So we also, with the shakeup, we're going to get an interim heavyweight title fight. And there's always a lot of talk about interim fights, and I'll probably talk about that in a second, just kind of how I feel about the interim fights. I think it was Henry Cejudo, just saying how he feels like it kind of waters it down. And like I said, we'll get into that in a second. But Jon Jones, Stipe Miocic, with Jon Jones going out off of this card, Stipe Miocic turned down both Sergey Pavlovich, who was the backup, and Tom Aspinall. At least that's what I've come to just see or hear. I can't remember exactly where some video, I think, or maybe an article that I read about him turning down both. But Pavlovich was the backup for this fight. Either way, but I totally get it for Stipe. Stipe wants that legacy fight. He wants a Jon Jones fight. I mean, Stipe's right there at the end of his career. 24 fights in his career, and 20 wins, 4 losses. Defended the heavyweight belt more than any other man in UFC history. Stipe, I think he deserves that fight, and I would love to see it. I would love to see the Jon Jones Stipe Miocic fight, because I think Stipe actually poses a threat to Jon Jones, where a lot of these heavyweights I don't think will. And I think we saw that with the Ciryl Gane fight. Jon Jones is different at the end of the day. Jon Jones is different. And, you can debate whether he's the greatest fighter of all time. And, he probably is when it comes down to it. I feel like there's enough asterisks in there for me personally. I don't know if I put him at that top spot. And just to be real honest, we could go into a whole nother episode about that. Just because at the end of the day, was Jon Jones clean his whole career? I don't know. It's very murky. So that's another question mark. And, he's a guy that has failed tests. So versus a guy like George St. Pierre that never failed a test. Whether you believe whether he was clean or not, totally different story. But at the end of the day, we have at least some proof that Jon Jones was doing a little something. So either way, that would be a huge legacy fight. And from the likes of it and what it sounds like, from what Dana White has said, that that will be the fight to make. That this interim title will go, and almost kind of reminds me of kind of that era with Randy Couture, because Brock Lesnar winning the belt from him. The interim belt set up between, honestly, I think it might have been before that even, the Frank Mir Minotauro Nogueira fight, but that is what set them up, because Nogueira won the interim belt from Tim Sylvia, lost it to Frank Mir, set up the huge Frank Mir versus Brock Lesnar 2, because Brock won the real belt against Randy Couture set up that huge matchup for UFC 100. So kind of gives those vibes a little bit because, or even the 135 when Cruz was out and you had Barao and defended that interim belt, I think once or twice at least, winning it off of Faber, and then until they were finally had to make it the official belt with Cruz being out so long. So we'll see how it goes. And so we'll get Sergey Pavlovich versus Tom Aspinall for that interim title, and the winner of that fight is going to be planned to face the winner of John Jones, Stipe Miocic. So, I mean, with John Jones being out for, probably closer to a year, around in there, that time frame, and then for that fight to happen between Jones and Miocic, and then for us to get a winner, because, we're talking about next weekend this fight's going down. I feel like more than likely, unless one of these guys takes the Carlos Condit route, which, again, could probably be a whole nother podcast about how I feel about that one. But unless they just sit out and sit on that interim title, which granted, you earned it. So, I get that aspect of it too. But either way, we'll see how that goes. We'll see if the interim belt gets defended at all. Just kind of go down the card a little bit. Another highlighted bout, Jessica Andrade versus Mackenzie Dern, should be a big-time women's strawweight fight next week. And I'll probably put something out for some picks at some point this week for this card. Honestly, right here off the top of my head, just looking at it, this is the first time I've kind of looked at this card, actually. So I don't think that I'm going to jump to any conclusions right now, but I'll probably at least give a little prediction for those top 3 fights or something like that. Go back and watch some of these guys fight a little bit more. Either way, I think this card is still pretty damn good. Just looking at the matchups that you have and those top 3, that last Tom Aspinall fight was really fun to watch. And honestly, I can't even remember off the top of my head who exactly it was against. But Yuri Prohaska, always, fun to watch. Alex Pereira as well has just been very fun to watch in his young UFC career. So I think this card is still pretty stacked. As for the interim titles, I feel like, especially in a situation like this, the interim title's needed. Maybe not needed, but it's nice to have that. And I guess I get it more from a promoter standpoint of putting that gold on somebody and kind of being a placeholder. To me, it doesn't diminish whatsoever, because even just going back to what we just talked about, when Randy Couture was having problems with the UFC didn't strip him. They ended up making an interim title. They then kind of had this almost tournament feel of kind of going back and forth with, Brock Lesnar taking the belt off, and then Randy Couture, when Randy Couture finally came back. You had an epic Tim Sylvia versus Minotauro Nogueira fight that Nogueira wins by, one of the slickest submissions in UFC history with that guillotine that he pulled off on him. Then you have the huge fight with Frank Mir and Minotauro Nogueira, and Mir being the first one to stop Nogueira ever due to strikes, and setting up that just colossal clash between Brock Lesnar and Frank Mir. Now, you don't always get these situations, because this one I think works out about the same way, because there is a real reason to have an interim title. But in the situations of the past where you look at Conor McGregor, where you look at 145 pounds, that division was just kind of, I feel like for the longest until Max took over, it was almost just like a cloud over it, a dark cloud, because your real champ had moved on, never came back. Then you had the same guys that were fighting for the belt before he came in, fighting for the belt again. And, after seeing Aldo get KO'd in 13 seconds, it was just, I don't want to say tough to take him seriously, but at the same time, I think we all knew we should have had a rematch. There should have been some type of rematch there at some point. And to never have gotten that stinks. And for him to move on, and, it's not even 155. You look at Khabib taking the belt, the belt being stripped, and then Khabib winning it against Ali Aquinta, and that being an asterisk. It just depends on who you ask when it comes to MMA fans of how they feel or what they think about, how he won the belt and then, kind of picked apart the division. I mean, obviously the Tony Ferguson fight would have given that way more validity rather than having Ally Quinta come in and, kind of. It was definitely an up and down fight, decent fight, but just one of those like, okay, Khabib set up to be the champ. And I think Khabib eventually redeemed himself, and I don't know, like I also, whatever. We're talking about interim belts, not to go into GOAT talk, but I think with the interim belt, sometimes it's definitely very needed, and I feel like this situation with the heavyweight belt right now, it is a very needed thing. We need an interim champion to hold over this division for right now. But again, I think it's a case-by-case basis. And that's kind of how I've always felt, because I don't think that it's a bad thing. I don't think the interim title is a bad thing whatsoever. But I do think it's a bit of a case-by-case basis. And personally, I'm a fan of interim belts. Now you got situations like Carlos Condit's situation where he kind of, has a boring fight to a point with Nick Diaz, wins that belt, and then holds that belt and takes, a year off or, however long it was until GSP was finally able to come back. That one, I mean, you're defeating the whole purpose of the interim belt at that point. I get you kind of punched your ticket, but you had already punched your ticket. Carlos Condit was set up to meet GSP for the belt on that card. GSP, went down, and, he wanted his chance to be the undisputed champion of the world, which totally understand. But at the same time, with, an interim belt being gained, I feel like if it's going to be a long period of time, it is kind of your job to then continue with that belt. I get that's pretty much you're holding on to a number one contender belt, but at the same time, I mean, the whole reason it's put in place is to kind of continue to keep the division along. And in these situations where we've seen it used that way, I feel like it's always been good. The heavyweight title picture, like I was talking about, around 2010-ish, 2009, around in there, 08, somewhere around in there, but late 2000s nonetheless, with Randy Couture and having his issues with the UFC, as well as Renan Barão. Shout out to Renan Barão, because, I mean, honestly, probably greatest interim champ of all time. At the end of the day, when you really think about it, I mean, he defended that thing at least once or twice, and then was upgraded to be the undisputed champion when Cruz couldn't come back in, timely fashion. I mean, give a guy maybe a year and a half-ish, depending on, from fight to fight, not a year and a half later, now we're setting up a fight. I don't know. It's definitely always a weird situation, but I think interim belts are a case-by-case situation. And at the end of the day, I personally think interim belts are good for the sport. I think it's good for just to put something a little bit extra on it. And I think that a lot of people don't like when it comes down to maybe like quote-unquote gimmicky things. You look at the BMF belt. But at the same time, I mean, it makes it fun. Let's have fun. I don't understand why we need to, I think when it comes down to it, I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't really understand sticklers where, not to say it's not only about the belt, because it is all about the belt, but at the end of the day, why can't we have fun with it too? I feel like, I mean, look at Pride and their success, which, granted, I'm not saying let's put a 135er against a heavyweight, but, or even just the Grand Prix over in Bellator, how much success that they've had. The PFL in their format, how much success they're having. And now with them merging, that's another decent topic to throw in there. It's been thrown in the last couple of weeks. With Bellator and PFL going to merge in the next couple of years. I think it's going to be 2 years Bellator is going to run separately as its own entity, and then they're going to merge together. But the crossover we could see from there, the way Scott Coker's done with the Grand Prix and go back to Strikeforce, I mean, the Grand Prix will always be a success. If the UFC ever pulled something like that, and I think the UFC would be in such a perfect situation to pull something like that. You don't even have to make it for a belt. It could just be a tournament to set up either a number one contender or, even something like a side quest almost, if you will, like the BMF belt or something like that. So anyways, I think that at the end of the day, having fun with the sport is always going to garner more attention and, certain a certain amount of buzz around it, essentially. And I mean, I don't know much about in the NBA's in-season tournament, but just seeing it advertised, I mean, it's just something fun, like, I think that's 100% okay, just to kind of have fun with it, and just depending, because at the end of the day, you don't have everybody fighting for the top prize, and you're always going to have those guys that are, right there at the threshold, and maybe propel somebody. I mean, look at the comebacks, the Ultimate Fighter, the comebacks, or something to that regard. But anyway, so we're going to end this podcast on just a little bit lighter of a note, just something I saw pop up on, I think, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. Maybe it's Instagram. But I think it was an Instagram of a Twitter post that Nate Diaz put out. Just with Nate Diaz saying he's not going to go to the minor leagues to fight Jake Paul. And I just thought that was funny and interesting. And, Nate Diaz might be the most interesting man in MMA, or the Diaz brothers in general. But just because that was kind of agreed to beforehand, which, I mean, Diaz is in it for the money right now, and I can't blame him for that at all. He did everything they needed to do. I think we'd all like to see that third fight with him and Conor, just to see it play out. But at this point, I kind of feel like it's probably never going to happen. Speaking of Conor, we'll see if he ends up fighting by the end of the year. I mean, we're in November now, so I mean, I don't know. Supposedly December's not off the table. But just curious to get your thoughts. Curious to get what the viewer thinks about Nate Diaz and Jake Paul, possible MMA matchup. Another one about Francis Ngannou. Let me know in the comments below, whether it's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube channel. Gonna plug that here at the end as well one more time. It's been a minute since we did the podcast. Gonna try to get more on the ball of putting out more podcasts, more video content. So check me out on any of the socials. Papa Schro knows, over on Instagram, Papa Schro on Twitter and TikTok, I believe. But yeah, YouTube channel, subscribe if you enjoy this content. The podcast, you can get it wherever you get your podcast at, as well as Substack. Substack hosts the podcast as well. papashroKnows.substack.com. Check out my writings. Subscribe. You could subscribe as a paid subscriber too if you want to support a little bit more. Just throwing it out there. You like the content. But also comment. Let me know. Let me know what you want to see. Let me know what you want to hear about. But this will not be the last MMA podcast I do. I've been enjoying really getting back into the sport and everything the last few months. It's definitely been a bright light in my life. Just kind of getting back to training and things like that, and just getting, back to that, different side of the sport. Really enjoy MMA, and has been a huge part of my life. So, again, if you like this content, subscribe, like. I'm going to stop rambling on. Thank you for listening to the podcast, and we will see you next time.